Hey everyone, it is the 8th of May and it is freezing. I'm Mitch from Colton Computers. I'm joined by my Between Two Techies buddy, Levi.
Hello.
And today we have our first guest, Charlotte O'Meara from Falcon Financial. Charlotte, do
Hello.
you want to tell everyone what you do and why you're here?
Yeah, sure. I am currently the general manager for a financial planning practice. So we're a small practice based in the northern beaches of Sydney. But prior to this, I've had a career in corporate, most recently as the head of responsible investment for Challenger, who is our Australia's leading retirement income provider. Through that, I've got a deep understanding of all things supply chain, and that's why I'm here today.
Woohoo! So
Nice.
this is very timely because yesterday Levi and I did Sips and Tips at Parrot and Orange, and it was Levi's turn to pick a topic. And Levi picked a very fun topic, didn't you, Levi?
100%. So I did contingent liability and supply chain. So yours, and ours. And yeah, I think slightly terrified a few people, but it's all good. There's things that you can do and there's insurances that you can organize to, protect yourself from these exposures that are especially whether it's, physical or in the virtual world.
And I think that's probably what we wanted to dig into a bit today, Charlotte, is the fact that certainly, in a regional setting, but more broadly, if people say supply chain, they instantly think of manufacturing, warehousing, logistics, and
Yeah.
supply chain is so much more than that.
Mm.
Yeah, definitely. And look, in my experience from an ESG perspective, supply every single company has a supply chain. So you're absolutely right. I think people can think, oh, I don't run a manufacturing company, or I don't run, a company that produces goods and produces goods, then I don't have a supply chain. But anyone has a supply chain. So even for my business, Falcon, we've got a supply chain of both, upstream and downstream supply chain that we have to have a think about. We have to do due diligence on and make sure all the risks are considered. And so that's the case for any business owner. And I think that
Mm.
not everyone thinks about it.
And what sort of things like what are the things that people need to be thinking about primarily? Like, where's the biggest risk? Like, I know, like in my business as a managed service provider, our biggest risk, well, we are our biggest risk to our clients probably, but it's because we carry so much upstream risk because, we're holding your Microsoft environment, we're holding your antivirus, your security, your managed threat response, all your network security, all of that.
Mm.
And so from our point of view, like all of our supply chain or all the vendors that we work with and use, we're then passing that, we're bundling that risk essentially and going, we think it's okay, we think it's good risk, we pray it's good risk, but and then from our client's point of view, rightly or wrongly, they usually turn around and go, I don't have to worry about insurance or anything because my MSP does everything for me. And it's like, well, that's not really how you manage your risk.
Mm.
Yeah, that's such a good point. You can't outsource your risk. That's the key thing that people have to remember, and that's the key thing that I think small business owners may not necessarily consider. So when you are outsourcing any kind of arrangement, so whether that is to IT, like your business, Mitch, or if you're outsourcing, in our case, we outsource to a service provider that provides services to us, admin support, etc. You can't outsource the risk of what's in their supply chain. So you think about it in terms of tiers of supply chain. And so you've got tier one, which is your immediate provider. So you might hire an IT provider, for example. And so you engage that IT provider, that's tier one. But then there are many different layers of tiers deep within that, which can sound scary, but I think it's really understanding how your tier one and tier two suppliers manage those risks? And are you comfortable with how they are managing those
And
risks?
and what's a tier two? Is a tier two like your tier one supplier's immediate supplier? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. So I think in my prior role, I did a lot of modern slavery due diligence. And so there were deep, deep layers of supply chains, particularly when you think about some of the complex global webs of supply chains and logistics. you could have 7 or 8 tiers of suppliers. Now, that's not practical to understand in reality exactly how your tier 8 supplier is managing their risk. But I would encourage all small business owners, are you comfortable with how your tier 1 is managing their risk? And then do you have look through to tier 2? Now, in Australia at the moment, I would say that people are starting to get a handle on tier 1, slowly turning their minds to tier 2. But beyond that, we just don't have the data and information to really understand in depth beyond that. So it really is, are you making your best efforts to understand your tier 1 and potentially get some insight into tier 2 if you can?
And I know, Charlotte, we were talking about this the other week, funnily enough, with regard to manufacturing.
Yeah.
But there is legislation around modern slavery, and
Mm.
there are some reporting stuff. What are those limits? Like, when does that stuff start? When do businesses have to start worrying about that? Or for most small businesses, is it just that your customer or your downstream supply chain turns around and says, "Hey, guess what? You're a tier 1 vendor for me, so you need to tell me what you're doing." Is that
Yeah.
usually starting?
Yeah, in the current state of modern slavery in Australia, yes, that's right. So the revenue threshold in the current Modern Slavery Act is $100 million or more. You have to produce a modern slavery statement in compliance with the Modern Slavery Act. Now that piece of legislation is currently under review, and I know that there has been a proposal that's gone to the Attorney General for that revenue threshold to be lowered to 50 million. So more companies might be captured if that revenue threshold lowers. But in reality, a lot of small businesses are well below that $50 million threshold. Some are bigger and luckier, and they're getting close to that 50 million or more, but most are below that. And so what is likely to happen is exactly what you said, Mitch. You're someone that you are engaging, particularly if they are a bigger company and you want to provide services to that company and you want to land that deal, you often have to do a supply chain due diligence questionnaire, often a modern slavery due diligence questionnaire, because they have to comply with the Modern Slavery Act. And there's a new, in terms of ESG, I mean, there are many other supply chain risks, cyber being one of them, which Mitch, you know much better
No,
than me.
no, Levi, there's no cyber risk, is there, mate?
No, no, not at all. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as cyber
Forget
insurance
cyber.
or claims. No, no, not at all.
Forget cyber. But just on back to ESG, which is the world I've come from, there's also a new Climate Disclosure Act that has come into effect in Australia. And so again, there's large revenue thresholds that capture companies, the largest companies in Australia that have to produce climate disclosure. But through that, they have to then look at the climate and the carbon emissions in their own supply chain and then disclose that to market. So again, smaller businesses might be asked more of these questions around what are you doing around sustainability? Have you considered your carbon footprint as a small business, and what do you do about that? Those questions might start coming through from some of these bigger companies.
Levi, you got scary supply chain questions to start asking? You who likes throwing
Oh,
at 'em
I
on
know,
questions?
which I love about that sort of stuff. So with I guess my big thing in supply chain is going to be about red notices and things such of that.
What's a
Charlotte,
red notice, Levi? What's a red notice?
okay, so
That's like you've got to empty whatever drink you're drinking right now. That's not
uh,
even a shot.
it's not even, yeah, that's exactly right. It's one of my key buzzwords at the moment. Been in the industry for 20 odd years, and it's only in the last very short while that I've actually seen a red notice, and now I've seen 2 of them in a year. And basically, red notice is where an insurer says, for these supply chains, we are not going to indemnify any losses due to human interference, terrorism, warfare, or piracy. Um,
Wow.
so we
That's
are
only
starting,
around marine cover.
yeah, so particularly around marine cover, but we're also seeing um, actual restrictions around cyber.
Oh, saying if a state-sponsored attack, what if hypothetically, if you're an Israeli company and an Iranian national attacks, we're not
Yep,
touching that with a 10
we're
foot
not
pole.
we're not indemnifying you. So, and we're actually seeing those sort of attacks happen broadly in regards to like retaliation for what's happening, but basically around allied countries and supporters and things like that. So those that support, either side of it, like Israel, the United States, or on the other side, you've got Iran and their allies as well. So you're seeing cyber attacks on both sides. But from the insurance side, what we're seeing is restrictions of cover. So from your point of view, Charlotte, like what do you think could be the uh, other implications related to these red notices? Like, is there other exposures that people need to be aware of related to it?
Yeah, so one of the things that quickly comes to mind is the prospect of a forced labor import ban in Australia. So other nations around the world, particularly EU, and the US as well, have put in place a forced labor import ban. So if there's been any kind of human rights red flags or controversies in that supply chain, that could be considered forced labor, and that's a complete import ban. Now,
Yeah,
what you could potentially have in the future, if Australia does bring in this legislation, which it is proposed to do so, you could potentially have insurance cover risk, I would say, and maybe a similar kind of red notice of what you're talking about.
yeah,
If there is evidence that you've imported forced labor goods and you've on-sold those in your company, potentially you could have an issue with insurance. And
mm.
so that is something that is live at the moment and something that people are considering.
And how is the forced labor stuff different to modern slavery? Is it like you might be getting paid, but you're being treated like crap, basically?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So modern slavery has a very strict definition under the Australian legislation, and so they are things such as, well, it's quite broad actually. So modern slavery is considered things like debt bondage. So say someone brings people into Australia under false pretenses, takes their passports, or they pay a recruiter. This is something that does happen. They pay a recruiter, say $10,000 to get to Australia, thinking that they've then got a job, but actually they are trapped in a condition and in a situation where they're sort of locked in a house. I think there was a case in Brisbane where they were actually locked in a house. They paid all this money to come to Australia, and then they were trapped in a house. So that's debt bondage. But even things like forced marriage is another one that's considered modern slavery. So it's quite a broad definition. To the forced labor import ban, while that legislation still hasn't been finalised, you're right, Mitch. It is a bit of a broader definition, and it's really challenging to narrow that down because a lot of our goods could be affiliated with forced labor, a huge amount in the IT space. I mean, that's considered a high risk industry with some of the parts that are coming through. So that's a huge volume of goods that could be considered. But I think my suggestion to any small business, if you're starting to think about this in terms of your own supply chain, look at the highest risk industries you have in your supply chain and have a look at the highest risk locations and see your exposure to those. One useful resource for anyone that's looking at this is Walk Free's Global Slavery Index. They've actually got a list of where they see the highest risk locations in the world and the highest risk industries. IT being one of them, Mitch. Um,
And,
but
and
you,
and why is that? Is it just component manufacturing
yes,
and and
exactly.
and and crappy supply, like just crappy forced factory labor type stuff?
Exactly. That's exactly right. So where the parts are coming from, and really having an understanding of that. So really, looking at seeing if you have any data on high risk industries and geographies
I'm
is
just
a good
looking
place to
now.
start.
It's really interesting. It says North Korea very bad.
Yeah. Yeah, if you there's an Excel spreadsheet that you can access on the website, and it's actually all in red. So there's a big chunk of countries in red, and if you're exposed to those countries, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have problems or
But it's
breaches,
just
but you
higher
should look
risk.
into it. Yeah, look
Mm.
into it a bit further.
It's very interesting. Very
Yeah,
interesting.
Very interesting tool and resource. And back when I was working in the investment space, we would actually use that tool to look at our investment exposure to those. So were we invested in some of those countries in red? Were we invested in some of the companies that are in those industries in red? And then doing some further due diligence and talking to those companies, or if they were in our supply chain, talking to those suppliers. What are you doing about this? What do you think
How are
about
you
it?
de-risking it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. And so I think that from an insurance perspective, particularly if we see a forced labor import ban, Levi, to your point, I think we'll see more around insurance.
Yeah, I think so too. And there are there are so many globalized restrictions now, like as general exclusions under,
Mm.
especially liability exposures.
Is that like the
Uh,
traditional, like in IT land? I know I'm just talking about IT because that's what I do. But talking about the fact that it's like, yeah, you're covered everywhere in the world to do this as long as your data's not sitting in the US, in which case you need to tell us because we want more money.
yeah, but it's actually a really good example of like where there is significant pressure and exclusion on the insurance side is this is from the 90s and early 2000s. There was a moratorium done on spacia policies, which is high value goods, things like paintings, diamonds, things of that nature, particularly around diamonds being banned
Is that
from.
just when all the blood diamond stuff was going on?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Sierra Leone conflicts and things like that. That was brought in as a worldwide, basically agreed ban for insurance. Where like we're not going to indemnify. Um, we're not going to indemnify uh, these
Thing, just this
uh,
active
th
passes.
these acquisitions or assets or anything like that, simply because it's an issue and it's conflict related or it's slavery related, things like that. So that was sort of the like my first big thing of seeing like an entire industry basically go, yeah, we're not going to provide any protection or liabilities or coverage
So
related to that.
does that mean if someone had a ring or something that had a diamond and they couldn't prove where it was from, they couldn't get insurance on that asset?
That could be the case, yeah. So because it
Ah,
can work retrospectively. So if do you remember when there was a big push where jewelry stores and things like that were saying conflict-free diamonds and that, like they were
yeah.
guaranteeing yeah. So this is what it was about. So jewelry shops couldn't get coverage for
Oh,
their
because they wouldn't even be
diamonds.
able to get their like normal
Uh-uh.
contents insurance.
No cover. And they weren't covered for
Wow.
marine cover either. So if they're importing them from like Antwerp or um, Haifa and places like that, which are the major sort of diamond markets, no cover at all. They were completely
And
exposed. I
of course,
mean,
don't want that because that's bad.
it's bad. So all of a sudden, they had to start tracking every single diamond location, things like that. But on the flip side, from the consumer side, uh, if you've got a very high value diamond, you need to have the origin of it. You need to be able to show provenance, basically, to say it's a conflict-free diamond. Because
Oh,
if
which
it's
is here's your De Beers certificate that says we've done an analysis on it and it came from
and
this mine here.
100%. So, and that's, yeah, basically one of the biggest restrictions that has ever been
That's
done.
That's so interesting. It's so relevant to mention conflict. I did a piece of work with the Responsible Investment Association of Australia a few years ago, where we did some research into conflict and what that might mean for investments. And conflict, any areas of conflict, significantly increases the red flags around human rights because when
Mm,
you're in a conflict zone, people become so much more vulnerable to human rights abuses, and they're displaced, they become refugees, they need to escape. So to the point of debt bondage, they are, if there was a recruiter there saying, pay me $10,000 and I'll get you out of here, they will just agree because they're so vulnerable. And so
mm,
when we start to see an increase in conflict around the world, which we're in that situation right now in the world, then the increased risk of human rights issues is really high as well. And so that that could come that example of the diamonds is really interesting, and we could start seeing more of that in other goods and services potentially as we
yeah.
see more conflict.
And I mean, without even getting into the scary side of it, it's just like, look at the cost of diesel at the moment. That's just like black and white supply chain issue.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, and COVID highlighted that as well. All the issues that we have with our
Yeah.
globalized supply chains and how vulnerable they are to shocks, conflict shocks, or in that
Yeah.
case, a pandemic.
Or,
Yeah.
or even like at the moment, like computer prices are through the roof and ridiculous because RAM, like computer memory's gone through the roof because there's 100 data centers opening this year around the world, and all the hyperscalers like your Googles, your Microsofts, and your Amazons are just buying all the RAM, and 90% of the RAM comes down to three manufacturers, and their order book is full.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, and the
So,
thing is, we're
yeah.
like back to the COVID times, right? So there was huge amounts, like globally, people were trying to trigger loss of income claims relating to COVID, right? So like restrictions on trade, people weren't able to open their businesses and so forth. But there's a really old clause in insurance. It's called the 1918 pandemic clause, and it
That's
has
the Spanish flu.
Spanish flu, yeah. So it dates back to then, and it's been in place since then. Like it's been in every insurance policy you've ever seen has got a clause in there saying, "Hey, if this relates to a pandemic of any kind, so endemic, pandemic, um, it's excluded. We're not going to cover it." Now, if you want to deep dive into something really odd with that, there's an extension under that clause under the Amazon
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
marine and transit. You know this one because I told you about this one a while back. There is a zombie clause under the Amazon.
No.
Yeah, yeah. If you're importing or exporting, and one of the ports is through certain sections of Africa, particularly around the Congo and places such as that, if it comes into contact or the transmission of a virus that um, reanimates someone who is deceased, it is a complete and utter exclusion, and we do not take any liability on the transmission or transport of said virus.
Wow. This is a first for my career, zombies.
Zombies, yep, it's in the T's and C's of Amazon's worldwide transport.
Wow.
Yeah,
That is a fun fact.
I know
Lloyd's of London have a long memory, don't they, Levi?
oh, they do such a long memory.
Oh dear. No, Levi, you got any other thoughts? I mean, this is the tip of the iceberg, and we'll probably end up
Mm,
having Charlotte back in the future, just because I think, 10 years ago, no one was thinking about any of this stuff.
Yeah,
so true.
But to your point, Charlotte, like, now that we have such a globalized, interconnected,
Mm.
complex supply chain everywhere,
mm,
I think, and then you get conflict, it just or pandemic or whatever, it just all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can't just get that. And it's probably, the generation of kids that think milk just comes from the supermarket shelf. There's
Yeah.
no there's no concept of the supply chain behind that.
mm,
Yeah, and I think that as a society, pre-COVID, we just became comfortable with you can just get things, things just come to you. There's no issues. Everyone forgot and didn't realize how sensitive the global supply chain is. And, we haven't even touched on some of the things at the moment in ESG, like weapons, the approach to weapons, how that is shifting across society, and particularly among investors. As we are in we became such a global society, and now we're seeing the fragmentation of the global world order, which is a whole other topic. But through that, you see so many, disruption to supply chain and the risks in supply chain is a huge issue. And yeah, from an ESG perspective, but an insurance perspective.
mm.
And you're seeing that as well, Mitch, with IT, cyber, and
Oh,
AI. We haven't even touched on AI.
oh, you were the first person to say AI, Charlotte. That's like
Sorry, sorry.
hey, we did well. We got like 20 minutes through without anyone saying AI. But but it is because people just type stuff into a chat box, and they have no thought of to, you know, who's seeing it? Where's the, so that there's a there's a data sovereignty question to be had. There's a which companies have access to, who has access to, is it updated in a public model, is it private, what's happening with it? Like
Mm.
it's and that's and I think because we are in such an interconnected world and everyone's got so used to, like, it's not like I'm going into a bad neighborhood. It's not like I'm getting on an aeroplane. It's not like I'm traveling anywhere. I'm sitting at my desk on my laptop. This must be safe.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Everyone's in their own little bubbles and not thinking about the fact that opening up ChatGPT and pouring your entire life story into ChatGPT could be a risk.
No, it's safe. It's totally safe.
Yeah.
They now
Levi,
know everything about everyone.
yeah, Levi will insure you against it. It's fine.
Yeah.
That mate can go away.
Sure.
There's no risk there. It's fine.
I I can actually imagine. Can you imagine the conversation that was had with Samsung after their engineer put their entire
Product
um,
roadmap.
product roadmap into ChatGPT, into the public ChatGPT? Do you reckon there was a conversation with their insurer going, "We cover that loss"?
But this is how precedents are written.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes. Yeah. And I would say in AI world, they're being written every hour.
Oh, massively. And the thing is there, and we're going to wrap up shortly and not go down another huge rabbit hole. But I think the thing is, and to your point earlier, Charlotte, about modern slavery sort of getting pushed down the supply chain more, we still have such an under disclosure happening in around data loss, data breach, and there's still a lot of like, oh yeah, I just don't have to tell anyone and it's not a problem. And I think this supply chain vetting is going to do a good job of helping grow it,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
and
I
just
think
build
so.
more awareness around it because it sort of has to happen.
Yeah. It'll
Genuinely.
only be a good thing. And I think that that's what we found when we were doing some of the investment analysis and our own supply chain analysis at Challenger. It opened up discussions around other aspects of the supply chain. So we might be looking at it just from a modern slavery perspective, but then, oh, that's what our IT providers are doing. Oh, around cyber, oh, we need to look at their data security. And so having a detailed map of your supply chain opens up so much value to your business in other areas that you might not even consider. And also looking at it from, are we getting the best from a cost perspective out of our supply chain? It opened up those conversations as well. So it is such a useful exercise.
Awesome. Oh, closing thoughts, Levi.
um,
You got to do some pretty good buzzwords today, mate.
I did. I got some great buzzwords in. It was fantastic. Okay, closing thoughts. Supply chains everywhere, fragile. Uh, Insure to a point, except for red zones, and then all bets are off.
Yeah, awesome. Charlotte, how did you find being between two techies? Oh, you've
Um,
even got a fern in the background. It's perfect.
Uh, Look, I think my summary is for the first time in my career, I've explored the issue of zombies. So that's been a really great part of this podcast. But my closing thoughts are, yeah, supply chains are fragile, but more important than ever before. So for all small business owners or anyone really listening to this podcast, start having a look at your supply chain. It just start having some conversations that you might not have considered before, and it will open up a whole world of information.
Awesome. I guess my thoughts are all of the above. That and don't get overwhelmed. I think you can go down the rabbit hole really, really fast and really hard. Like, you can tell I'm a Lego fan, but just start building in layers. Don't try and do that because I think you'll come unstuck. Anyway, thanks for being our first guest, Charlotte.
I'm honored. I'm honored to be the first guest. And yeah, I hope to come back again in the future and we can talk more about some of the other issues that we haven't even got to today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.